It started with an idea that sounded almost too simple. What if money didn't have to be gold? Not coins, not metal, not something heavy you could hold in your hand. Just paper. Paper backed by belief. In the early 1700s, this idea wasn't just unusual, it was dangerous. For centuries, wealth had meant something tangible. Gold and silver weren't just money, they were trust, stability, power. Kings built empires on them, wars were fought over them. And then a Scottish gambler walked into France and suggested replacing it all. Not slowly, not cautiously, all at once. His name was John Law, and for a brief moment in history, he convinced an entire country to believe him. What followed wasn't just a financial experiment, it was something much bigger, a complete rewiring of how an economy could work, a system where money could be created, expanded, multiplied, without digging anything out of the ground. At first, it looked like a miracle. France, at the time, was buried under debt. Years of war had drained the treasury. The crown owed vast sums it couldn't easily repay. The economy was sluggish, confidence was low, and the old system, based on precious metals, felt rigid, almost suffocating. There simply wasn't enough gold to go around. Law saw this as the problem, and more importantly, he believed he had the solution. Instead of relying on limited reserves of metal, why not create money that could grow with the economy? Paper notes, issued by a central bank, circulating freely, easier to use, easier to expand, easier to control. If people trusted the system, it could unlock trade, boost investment, and pull France out of its financial paralysis. It sounded radical. It was radical. But it also made a strange kind of sense. And that's how it began. Not with a bubble, not with chaos, but with trust. Law convinced the French government to let him set up a bank. At first, it seemed almost modest. The bank would issue paper notes backed by real assets, redeemable in coin. People could deposit their metal money and receive something lighter, more convenient in return. And slowly, cautiously, people began to accept it. Then something unexpected happened. It worked. Trade picked up, confidence returned, the notes circulated. For the first time in years, the economy felt alive again. The weight of debt seemed a little less crushing. Money was moving. And John Law, once an outsider, started to look like a genius. But he didn't stop there, because for Law, this wasn't just about fixing money. It was about building something far bigger, a company, one that would control trade, land, and wealth across France's vast colonial territories, especially in a place most people had never seen but were beginning to dream about, Louisiana, a land whispered about as rich, untapped, full of possibility. Law merged his financial system with this vision. His paper money and his company became intertwined. The notes people held, the wealth they believed in, it all began to point toward one thing: shares in a company that promised unimaginable returns. At first, only a few paid attention, then more, then everyone, because the price kept rising and rising and rising. What started as a financial reform was quietly turning into something else, something faster, something harder to control. People weren't just using money anymore, they were chasing it. Nobles, merchants, ordinary citizens, even those who had never invested a coin in their lives, suddenly found themselves drawn in. The streets of Paris began to fill with speculation. Fortunes were made overnight, or at least it seemed that way. And behind it all was a single fragile idea: that paper could hold value, that belief could sustain a system, that it would keep working. For a while, it did, too well, because the more it worked, the more people believed, and the more they believed, the further it stretched reality itself. By the time anyone started to question it, France wasn't just participating in the system, it was the system. And John Law wasn't just running an experiment anymore.
He was holding the entire economy in his hands. The strange thing about financial manias is that they rarely feel like madness while you're inside them. From the outside, it's easy to ask how people didn't see the risks, how an entire nation could get swept up in something so fragile. But from within, it often feels like progress, like momentum, like the future arriving early. That's exactly what was happening in France. John Law hadn't just introduced paper money, he had tapped into something deeper. A country exhausted by debt and stagnation suddenly had a way forward. Credit was expanding, trade was improving, and confidence, that invisible force that underpins every economy, was returning. And Law understood something most people didn't. Money is only part of the system. The real engine is belief. So he began to build around it. His bank evolved into the Banque Royale, backed by the authority of the crown. And that mattered. It meant the paper notes weren't just an experiment anymore. They were official, state-sanctioned, with the king himself standing behind them. At the same time, Law's trading venture, the Mississippi Company, began absorbing other companies, other monopolies, other pieces of the French economy. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was becoming the business. Control of trade with North America, tax collection, government debt. Piece by piece, Law was consolidating power into a single financial structure, a system where his bank issued the money and his company absorbed the wealth. And for a while, it looked like brilliance. France's massive national debt, once seen as an insoluble burden, was being folded into this system. Creditors could exchange government debt for shares in the Mississippi Company, and instead of waiting for repayment from a struggling state, they now held a stake in something that promised growth, something that promised profit. It was a clever shift. Debt, which had felt like a dead weight, was transformed into opportunity. But there was a catch. The value of that opportunity depended on one thing: the price of the shares continuing to rise. And rise they did, at first gradually, then quickly, then almost uncontrollably. Paris began to change. On a narrow street called Rue Quincampoix, something new was taking shape. It wasn't a formal stock exchange as we know it today, but it didn't need to be. It was louder, messier, more human. People gathered there in crowds: traders, nobles, servants, shopkeepers. Some came to buy, others to sell, many just to watch. News spread through whispers and rumors, and prices shifted by the hour. Fortunes were being made in real time. A man could arrive in the morning with modest savings and leave by evening believing he was rich. Stories spread quickly, of cooks becoming investors, of clerks outpacing aristocrats, of ordinary people stepping into a world that had once been closed to them. The barriers were falling, and with them caution. The Mississippi Company became more than an investment. It became a national obsession. People spoke of Louisiana as if it were overflowing with gold and silver, even though few had ever seen it, and fewer still understood its reality. The idea of wealth was enough. The promise carried more weight than the truth. And the system fed itself. As share prices climbed, confidence grew. As confidence grew, more people bought in. And as more people bought in, prices climbed even higher. And Law supported it too. More shares were issued, more paper money was printed, and liquidity flowed into the market, making it easier for people to buy and easier for prices to rise. It felt like expansion, like growth, like France had discovered a new kind of wealth. But beneath the surface, something subtle was shifting. The system was no longer grounded in what the company actually produced or controlled. It wasn't about trade or land or real profits anymore. It was about expectation, about what people believed it could become. And expectations, unlike gold, don't have limits.
They can stretch, they can inflate, they can detach from reality entirely. By now, even the most cautious observers were being pulled in. Nobles who had once dismissed Law's ideas were now heavily invested. Government officials relied on the system to stabilize finances, and the public saw it as their chance, maybe their only chance, to rise. Everything was connected: money, debt, shares, belief. And at the center of it all was John Law, trying to manage a system that was growing faster than anyone could fully understand. Because the truth is, success can be more dangerous than failure. Failure forces you to stop. Success convinces you to keep going. And Law kept going.